I will find who took it.
3 days earlier, none of this seemed possible. Kong Minho was, by every external measure, a man who had already won. At 33, he sat at the head of one of Korea's fastest-growing conglomerates, a company his father had built from a single textile factory into an empire spanning shipping, technology, and finance. Analysts called him ruthless. Employees called him exacting. He preferred the word disciplined. He had inherited the company at 26, when his father died of a sudden heart attack in this very study, at this very desk. Minho had been in a business meeting in Singapore when the call came. He hadn't made it back in time to say goodbye. He told himself afterward that grief was a luxury for people who had the time to indulge it. He buried the loss the way he buried everything, under work, under structure, under the belief that if he simply controlled every variable, nothing would ever be taken from him again. The pocket watch had been the one thing he allowed himself to feel something about. Gold, engraved, worn smooth at the edges from his father's thumb running over it during 100 long meetings. It didn't tell time particularly well anymore. It didn't need to. It was the last thing his father had touched before he died, found still resting in his palm. Minho kept it in a locked drawer in his study and looked at it most nights, alone, when no one could see him do it. Amina had started working in the Kong household 14 months earlier, hired through an agency after the previous housekeeper retired. She was 30 years old, originally from Lagos, and she rarely spoke about her life before Seoul unless someone asked directly, and most people didn't think to ask. What the staff did know was this: she worked harder than anyone else in the house. She arrived earliest and left latest. She remembered which of the security guards took their coffee black and which one was trying to quit sugar. She never gossiped, never complained, and never once asked Minho for anything, even when he forgot, more than once, to have her paid on time. What almost no one knew was that Amina was raising her 6-year-old son, Daniel, entirely alone, in a one-room apartment 40 minutes outside the city by bus. Her husband, Tund, had died 3 years earlier. She didn't talk about how. She sent nearly everyone she earned back to the small account she kept for Daniel's medical fund, and she ate one meal a day more often than she let anyone find out. Daniel had been born with a congenital heart defect. The doctors in Lagos had told her years ago that he would need surgery eventually, a surgery that cost more than she could earn in 5 years at any job she'd ever held. She had come to Korea on a work contract specifically because the wages were higher, sending money home to her sister, who cared for Daniel while Amina worked 11,000 kilometers away. 6 weeks before the night the watch disappeared, a doctor at a Seoul clinic, one Amina had gone to on her one day off, worried about a cough that wouldn't clear, had looked at Daniel's most recent scans, sent over by her sister, and told her something that changed everything. The surgery couldn't wait much longer. 6 months, the doctor guessed. Maybe less. She had not told anyone at the Kong residence. She had simply started working harder, hoping harder, praying harder, certain that if she was patient and honest and good at her job, some door would eventually open. She did not know, standing in that study with a folder of documents in her hands, that the door was about to slam shut instead. Asterisk: if this story is pulling you in already, make sure to like this video. It genuinely helps more people find stories like Amina's. And drop a comment letting me know. Do you think Minho deserves to be forgiven for what he's about to do? Now let's go back to the night everything fell apart. Asterisk. It was 7 in the evening when Minho called Amina into the study. The Choi merger documents, he said without looking up from his laptop. Sign confirmation and leave them on the desk. Yes, sir. She'd been in and out of that study 100 times. She set the folder down exactly where he always wanted it, careful not to disturb the neat stacks of paper already there, and left within 90 seconds. She thought nothing of it. It was, by every measure, an unremarkable errand on an unremarkable Tuesday. She had no way of knowing that in the next room, his cousin J1 was watching her enter and leave through the security monitor with a small, satisfied smile. The kind of smile that belongs to a man who has just watched a plan click into place. 20 minutes later, Minho reached for the drawer where he kept his father's watch, the way he did most evenings before locking up the study for the night. The drawer was empty. The The bus rattled through the dark streets of Seoul, and Amina sat pressed against the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass, tears she refused to let fall burning behind her eyes. She kept replaying it. The empty drawer, the accusation, the way Minho's face had gone white with rage before he even asked her a single real question. 14 months of arriving early, of staying late, of never once taking more than what was owed to her, and none of it had mattered the moment something went missing. Her phone buzzed. A message from her sister, Grace, back in Lagos. Daniel had a good day today. He asked when you're coming home. I told him soon. Was that a lie? Amina stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. Not a lie, just later than I hoped. I love you both. She didn't tell Grace what had happened. What was there to say? That she'd lost the only job in the city willing to pay her enough to save her son's life? That she'd been called a thief in front of 11 people who used to smile at her every morning? She got off 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way. Not because she needed the exercise, but because she needed the cold air on her face, needed something to focus on besides the humiliation still sitting in her chest like a stone. Her apartment was small, 1 room, a shared bathroom down the hall, a hot plate she used for cooking. She sat on the edge of her bed and opened the folder she kept under her mattress. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every payslip from the Kong household carefully organized, because she had learned a long time ago that a woman with nothing else has to keep careful records of what little she does have. Now, without the job, the folder felt like evidence of a life that no longer existed. She thought about calling the agency that had placed her, but it was nearly 10 at night, and she knew already what they'd say. No reference. Fired for theft. In this industry, that kind of accusation didn't need to be proven. It only needed to be said. For the first time in 3 years, since she had buried Tund in a plot of red earth outside Lagos and promised him, standing over the fresh dirt, that she would never let anything stop her from saving their son. For the first time since then, Amina allowed herself to cry. This part of the story genuinely gets harder before it gets better. But I promise you it does get better. If you're still with us, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss what happens next. And if you've ever been judged before anyone bothered to hear your side, let me know in the comments. This one might hit close to home. Back at the Kong residence, the house was unusually quiet. Minho sat alone in his study, the empty velvet box still open on his desk. He hadn't moved to clean up the broken glass. He hadn't eaten dinner. He simply sat, staring at the space where his father's watch should have been, replaying the security footage in his mind on a loop. Amina walking in, Amina walking out, 90 seconds, nothing more. It should have felt like justice firing her. Didn't. It felt like something else. Something he didn't have a name for yet, sitting uneasily in his stomach. A knock came at the door. It was J1, his cousin, dressed impeccably as always, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. I heard what happened, J1 said, settling into the chair across from the desk without waiting to be invited. The maid. Terrible business. She denied it, of course. They always do. J1 slid one of the glasses across the desk. You did the right thing, cousin. You can't let people think they can steal from this family and get away with it. Especially now, with the merger vote coming up. The board is watching everything you do. Minho didn't touch the whiskey. I keep thinking about how calm she was. Guilty people usually beg. She just looked at me like she was disappointed. Guilt does strange things to people. J1's tone was light, almost bored, but his eyes lingered on Minho a beat too long. Don't waste another thought on it. The watch is gone either way. Best thing you can do now is move forward. The merger needs your full attention. The board votes in 10 days, and if this deal doesn't close, a lot of people are going to start asking uncomfortable questions about your leadership. After J1 left, Minho sat with that word, uncomfortable, turning it over. He didn't know, not yet, that his cousin had been the one asking uncomfortable questions for months. Questions to board members over private dinners. Questions about whether a 33-year-old CEO with no wife, no children, and an increasingly rigid management style was really the right man to lead the company through its next decade. Questions that, if answered the way J1 hoped, would end with the board looking elsewhere for leadership, specifically toward the only other Kong family member with a claim to the seat. The missing watch and the scandal J1 intended to build around it was never really about a piece of jewelry. It was about making Minho look erratic, impulsive, a man who fired loyal staff over unproven accusations, who couldn't be trusted to keep his own house in order, let alone a company worth billions. J1 had taken the watch himself 3 nights earlier, timing it perfectly so that Amina's brief, routine visit to the study would be the last thing the security footage showed before Minho discovered it missing. It was almost too easy. He'd simply had to wait for an innocent woman to walk into the wrong room at the wrong time, and let Minho's temper do the rest. Now you know what Minho doesn't, and it's about to get worse before it gets better. If you want to see this cousin get exactly what's coming to him, smash that like button, because trust me, it's coming. Let's keep going. The next morning, word of Amina's firing had already spread through the household staff like smoke through a closed room. In the kitchen, an older housekeeper named Mrs. Yoon set down her tea with a hand that trembled slightly. She would never, Mrs. Yoon said quietly to no one in particular. 14 months. Not once did I see that girl take so much as an extra biscuit from the pantry. Then why didn't you say something last night? Asked one of the younger maids, Sujin, not unkindly, more out of guilt than accusation. Mrs. Yoon didn't answer right away. Because Mr. Kong doesn't listen when he's angry. You know that as well as I do. Sujin looked down at the tray in her hands. She had liked Amina. Amina had covered her shift once, without being asked, when Sujin's mother was in the hospital. She had never mentioned it again, never used it to ask for a favor in return. And now she was gone, walked out the front doors like a criminal, and none of them had said a word in her defense. It sat with all of them differently that morning, the silence they'd kept, the fear that had kept their mouths shut. None of them said it out loud, but each of them wondered quietly whether they'd just watched something happen that they would regret for a long time. 2 floors up, Minho stood at the window of his study, looking out over the grounds without really seeing them. He picked up his phone twice to call the head of security and ask them to review the footage again, more carefully this time, and twice he set the phone back down. He told himself he didn't need to. The footage was clear. She was the last one in the room. But some part of him, small and quiet and easy to ignore in the daylight, kept circling back to the way she'd looked at him at the door. Not angry, not desperate, just certain, in a way that unsettled him more than any accusation could have. One day you'll discover the truth, she'd said. He poured the whiskey J1 had left behind into the sink and didn't know why. By that afternoon, Grace called Amina in a panic. Daniel's fever came back, she said, her voice tight over a bad connection. The doctor here says it might be nothing, but with his heart, they want to keep him for observation. Amina, I don't know if I can cover this on my own. Amina closed her eyes, sitting on the floor of her small apartment, the folder of payslips still open beside her. Payslips from a job she no longer had. I'll find the money, she said, and she meant it, even though she had no idea in that moment exactly how. If you're feeling this one in your chest right now, you're not alone. Drop a comment and let us know you're still here, still rooting for her. We're just getting started. Next is where the truth finally starts breaking through. Don't go anywhere. 3 days after Amina walked out of the mansion, a courier arrived at the Kong residence with a package for Minho. A routine delivery of documents from the family's insurance office. Nothing that should have mattered at all. But tucked inside, misfiled by an assistant who hadn't realized its significance, was a claims report Minho hadn't asked for and didn't remember ordering. An inventory reconciliation from the household's insurer, cross-checking recent security footage timestamps against the mansion's internal camera logs as part of a routine annual policy review. Minho almost set it aside. He was exhausted, buried in merger paperwork, running on 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee. But something made him open it. Maybe the same restless unease that had followed him around for 3 days. The unease he hadn't been able to name since Amina had looked at him at the door and told him he'd discover the truth. The report flagged a 2-minute gap in the security footage from the night the watch disappeared. a gap that occurred nearly 20 minutes before Amina had ever entered the study. Minho sat up straight. He called the head of security into his office within the hour. "Explain this," he said, sliding the report across the desk. The security chief, a middle-aged man named Mr. Park who had worked for the family for over a decade, studied the page and went pale. "Sir, we reviewed the footage the night this happened. I didn't see any gap. Look again. Pull the raw files, not the summary reel someone put together for me. All of it." It took Mr. Park almost 2 hours. When he returned, his hands were unsteady as he set a laptop down on the desk and turned the screen toward Minho. "There," he said quietly, pointing. "Right here. The system shows a 2-minute loss of signal at 6:41 p.m. Someone accessed the server room and looped a static frame over the live feed. The subtle, I only found it because I went through every single frame by hand. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Who has access to the server room?" Mr. Park hesitated. "Building security. And..." He stopped. "And who else, Mr. Park?" "Your cousin, sir. Mr. J1 has had a key since he helped set up the system 2 years ago." The room went very quiet. This is the moment everything starts to unravel. And trust me, it only gets bigger from here. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because the next few minutes are where this story really explodes. Let's keep going. Minho didn't say anything for a long moment. He thought about the whiskey J1 had brought him that first night. The casual way he'd said guilt does strange things to people. The gentle, persistent pressure about the merger vote, about how the board was watching, about how erratic decisions could cost him everything. He thought about how easily he had believed the worst about a woman who had never given him a single reason to doubt her, and how quickly he had trusted a man who had given him plenty. "Pull everything," Minho said, his voice low and controlled in a way that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. "Financial records, access logs, everything my cousin has touched in this house for the last 6 months. I want it on my desk by morning." By morning, it wasn't just a 2-minute gap in footage. It was a pattern. J1 had been quietly meeting with 3 board members over the past 4 months. Always at private dinners. Always steering conversation toward Minho's fitness to lead. He had taken out a significant personal loan 2 months earlier, using shares in a shell company as collateral, shares that, upon closer inspection, appeared to be preparation for a hostile position ahead of the merger vote. And buried in an old expense report, barely worth noticing on its own, was a charge from a locksmith for a replacement study key, dated the same week the watch disappeared. Minho called his cousin into the study himself. J1 walked in with the same easy, unbothered smile he always wore, and it was that smile, more than anything else, that told Minho everything he needed to know. "You wanted to see me? Sit down." J1 sat, still smiling, though something behind his eyes shifted when he saw the files spread across the desk. "The watch," Minho said. "Where is it?" "I don't know what you're talking about." 2-minute gap in the footage. A locksmith charge for a study key I never ordered. For months of dinners with board members where you told them I'm unstable. A loan against shares you shouldn't have been able to touch without my signature. Minho's voice never rose, but each word landed like a stone dropped into still water. "I want the watch, J1, and I want to know exactly how long you've been planning this." For a moment, J1 said nothing. Then, slowly, the smile faded, and something colder took its place. "You want to know how long?" he said. "Since Uncle died and left you everything." "Everything, Minho. The company, the house, the seat on the board, and what did I get? A vice president title and a corner office. I built half of this company's technology division with my own hands, and you got to sit at the head of the table because of an accident of birth order. So you decided to destroy an innocent woman to take it from me." "She was never the point," J1 snapped. "She was convenient. You were always going to fire whoever was standing in that room because that's who you are. Minho, you don't ask questions, you just react. I didn't make you unfair. I just gave you an opportunity to prove it in front of the board." Minho stood, his hands flat on the desk, and for the first time in years, J1 saw something in his cousin's face that actually frightened him. "Get the watch," Minho said. Now. Or I call the police in the next 5 minutes and let them find it themselves. Asterisk if you're satisfied watching this cousin finally get caught. Comment justice below. I want to see how many of you predicted this. But don't celebrate yet, because Minho still has to fix what he broke. Keep watching. Asterisk. The watch was recovered within the hour, hidden in a drawer in J1's private office, wrapped in a cloth at the bottom of a locked filing cabinet. The police were called. J1 was arrested that same evening on charges of fraud, theft, and attempted corporate sabotage, led out of the mansion in handcuffs past the same staff who had watched Amina walk out 3 days earlier, a symmetry none of them missed. But recovering the watch didn't undo what had already been done. And as the adrenaline of confronting his cousin faded, Minho was left standing in his study with a truth far harder to face than any boardroom betrayal. He had accused an innocent woman, publicly, without hesitation, based on nothing but a security clip and his own worst instincts. He had let his people watch him do it. And she had walked out those doors 3 days ago without an apology, without a reference, and, as far as he knew, without anywhere to go. Mr. Park, he said, I need Amina's contact information, whatever the agency has on file. Now. The number the agency provided had already been disconnected. She'd fallen behind on her phone bill 2 days earlier. One more small casualty of a paycheck that had suddenly stopped coming. Mr. Park managed to track down a secondary address through the staffing agency's records, an apartment on the eastern edge of the city. Minho didn't wait for a driver. He took his own car for the first time in longer than he could remember and drove there himself, gripping the wheel too tightly, rehearsing and discarding apology after apology the entire way. He arrived to find the building superintendent locking up the front entrance for the night. I'm looking for a woman named Amina Bello. Unit 12, I believe. The superintendent studied him for a moment. His expensive coat, his expensive car idling at the curb, and something in his expression turned wary. She's not here. Do you know where she is? Her neighbor came to get her things 2 nights ago. Said something happened. Said Amina collapsed. They took her to the public hospital across the district. That's all I know. Minho felt something drop through the floor of his chest. Which hospital? Asterisk, we're almost at the moment this whole story has been building toward. If Amina's strength has moved you even a little, hit like right now, it costs nothing, and it tells us to keep bringing you stories like hers. Next is where everything comes together. Don't miss it. The public hospital was nothing like the private clinics Minho was used to. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, and every chair was full of tired people waiting for news about someone they loved. He found the front desk and gave Amina's name, his voice unsteady in a way it never was in boardrooms. Are you family? The nurse asked, not looking up from her screen. No. He stopped. What was he, exactly? Her former employer. The man who'd humiliated her in front of a room full of people and then thrown her out into the night. I need to see her. Please. It's important. Something in his tone must have carried, because the nurse glanced up, studied him for a moment and finally said, She's stable. Exhaustion, dehydration, and stress. Her body basically shut down on her. She's in room 214. But she also has a young boy staying with her. His condition is more serious. I'll let the doctor explain. A boy. Minho's chest tightened. He hadn't known. None of them had known that she had a son at all, let alone one who was sick enough to be in a hospital himself. He walked down the corridor slowly, and through the half-open door of room 214, he saw her. Amina looked smaller than he remembered, propped up against thin pillows, and 4 taped to the back of her hand. Beside her bed, in a chair pulled close, sat a little boy 6, maybe 7, with a hospital band around his thin wrist, his head resting against his mother's arm as he slept. Amina's eyes opened as Minho's shadow crossed the doorway. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. You shouldn't be here, she said finally, her voice hoarse. I know. He stepped inside anyway. Amina, I don't. She said it quietly, but there was steel underneath it. Don't come here and say you're sorry like it fixes anything. Do you know what the last 3 days have been like? I lost my job. I lost my reputation. I couldn't pay for Daniel's medicine, and now he's here, and the doctors are telling me his surgery can't wait much longer, and I don't—" Her voice cracked. She pressed her lips together and looked away, toward her sleeping son, as if the sight of him was the only thing holding her together. Minho stood very still. He deserved every word of it, and he knew it. "You're right," he said. "Nothing I say fixes it. I'm not here to ask you to forgive me tonight, or even this year, if that's not something you can do. I'm here because I found out the truth, and you deserve to hear it from me, not from a lawyer or a press release." He told her everything. The gap in the footage, J1's confession, the arrest. He watched her face as he spoke, waiting for some flicker of vindication, but what he saw instead was simple, bone-deep exhaustion, as if being right had never been the point, as if all she'd ever wanted was for someone to have listened in the first place. This is the moment 3 episodes have been building toward. If it's hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, take a second and comment where you're watching from. It helps this story reach more people who need it. Now let's see what happens next. What's his name? Minho asked quietly, nodding toward the sleeping boy. Daniel. May I ask what's wrong with him? Amina hesitated, then seemed to decide there was no point protecting information from a man who'd already seen the worst and the most private parts of her life laid bare in a single week. A congenital heart defect. He's needed surgery for years. I came to Korea because the pay was better than anything I could find at home, and I thought if I worked long enough I could save enough. And then I lost the one job that was actually getting me close. How much does the surgery cost? Mr. Kong, I don't need your— How much? She told him. It was, to Minho, an almost absurdly small number. Less than he'd spent on a single dinner during merger negotiations the week before. He said nothing about that. He simply nodded, once, and pulled out his phone. I'm calling the hospital director, he said. Daniel will be moved to the best cardiac unit in Seoul tonight, and the surgery will happen as soon as the doctors say he's ready. I'll cover everything. Not as an apology, as what should have already been available to a child who needed it, regardless of what happened to his mother's job. I won't be some charity case you feel better about. You're not a charity case. His voice was firm now, steadier than it had been since he walked in. You're a woman I wronged, and a child who shouldn't have to wait one more day because I let my temper make a decision that wasn't mine to make so carelessly. Let me do this. Not for me. For him. Amina looked at her son, at the small rise and fall of his chest, and after a long moment, she nodded. Not because she forgave Minho, not yet, but because a mother doesn't turn away help her child needs out of pride. Not when the stakes are this high. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is about to turn a corner. Smash that like button if you're hoping for the ending I think you're hoping for. Let's keep going, we're almost there. Daniel's surgery took place 6 days later, in a private wing of Seoul's top cardiac hospital, performed by a surgeon Minho had personally requested from overseas. Amina sat in the waiting room for 4 hours, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white, and when the surgeon finally emerged, smiling, to tell her it had gone perfectly, she cried harder than she had the night she was fired. But this time, it wasn't grief. Minho had been there too, sitting a respectful distance away the entire time. Not because anyone had asked him to, but because he hadn't been able to make himself leave. In the weeks that followed, he did what he'd promised. And more. He called a meeting of the entire household staff and, in front of all of them, formally and publicly retracted the accusation against Amina. He didn't dress it up or soften it. I was wrong, he told them. His voice carrying through the same hallway where Amina had once been walked out in disgrace. I accused an innocent woman without listening to a single word she tried to tell me, because it was faster and easier than doubting myself. Several of you suspected as much and said nothing, out of fear of how I'd react. And that fear is on me too, not on you. I want this house to be a place where the truth can be spoken, even to me, especially to me. Mrs. Yoon, standing near the back, wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. Soo-jin looked over at the empty spot by the pantry where Amina used to work and allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to hope. The news of J1's arrest and the real story behind the theft became impossible to keep quiet, and rather than run from it, Minho got ahead of it. Releasing a public statement that named the truth plainly, praised Amina's integrity, and announced the creation of a new position within the Kong Family Foundation. Director of Community Welfare, focused on supporting immigrant workers and families navigating exactly the kind of precarious situation Amina had been in. He offered her the role in person, sitting across from her in a quiet cafe near the hospital, Daniel, recovering well, color back in his cheeks, drawing quietly at the table between them. "I don't want you to say yes because you feel like you owe me an answer," Minho said. "I want you to say yes because you'd be good at it, because you understand, better than anyone in that boardroom ever could, what it actually means to help someone who has nothing left to fall back on." Amina considered him for a long moment, this man who had humiliated her in front of everyone she worked with, and who had also, when the truth came out, chosen to fix what he broke instead of quietly making it disappear. "I'm not doing this so you can feel better about yourself," she said. "I know, and I'm not going to pretend the last month didn't happen. I don't want you to." She looked down at Daniel, still drawing, still humming quietly to himself, healthy in a way he hadn't been in years. "Then yes," she said, "I'll take the job. Not for you. For every family out there who's one bad week away from losing everything. We're almost at the end now, and I think you're going to love where this lands. If you've stayed this long, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe and comment your favorite moment from this story. Here's how it all comes together. Months passed. Daniel grew stronger, running through the halls of the Kong Foundation offices after school while his mother worked, charming every staff member he met with the same quiet warmth Amina carried. The foundation expanded quickly under her direction, building partnerships between Korea and communities across West Africa, funding medical care for children whose families couldn't otherwise afford it, and setting up a support network specifically for domestic workers, the kind of safety net Amina had needed and never had. Minho changed too in ways the board noticed before he did. He asked more questions before making decisions. He listened longer before speaking. The merger closed successfully, but for the first time it wasn't the thing he was proudest of that year. What grew between him and Amina wasn't sudden. There was no dramatic confession, no single moment either of them could point to and say, "That's when it started." It built slowly, in long conversations about the foundation's work, in the easy trust of two people who had already survived the worst version of each other and chosen, deliberately, to build something better. Minho learned Daniel's favorite cartoons. Amina learned that the CEO everyone described as cold spent an entire Saturday afternoon teaching a 6-year-old to ride a bike in the mansion's front courtyard, laughing in a way none of his staff had ever heard before. A year after the night she was wrongly accused, Minho asked Amina to meet him in the study, the same room where it had all gone wrong. She hesitated at the door for a moment, old memory flickering, before she stepped inside and found it transformed. The broken glass long gone, fresh flowers on the desk, and Minho standing exactly where he'd once stood in fury, now holding something entirely different in his hands. "I know what this room means to you," he said. "I wanted to give it a new memory, one worth keeping." He opened a small box, not his father's pocket watch this time, but a ring, and asked her, in front of no one but the two of them, to marry him. Amina thought about the woman who had walked out those doors a year earlier with nothing but a folder of scattered papers and a promise to a dead husband that she'd never told anyone she was fighting to keep. She thought about how far both of them had come to stand in this room again, differently. "Yes," she said. Word spread through the household within the hour, and by evening, the same staff who had once watched her walked out in disgrace gathered to celebrate her standing in that study, radiant, beside the man who had once wronged her and spent every day since trying to earn something better. Sometimes the greatest mistake isn't losing something valuable. It's failing to see the value of a good person until they're almost gone. If the story moved you, don't scroll away without hitting subscribe. We bring you a new one just like it every week. Like this video if you believe in second chances, and tell us in the comments. What part of Amina's story stayed with you the most? Thank you for watching until the very end. We'll see you in the next one.